The first thing Claire Bennett ever stole from me was not money. It was the certainty that kindness always came with a price. At 2:13 in the morning, my phone vibrated against the walnut desk beside a cup of coffee I had forgotten to finish. One alert glowed across the screen. Kitchen motion detected. I stared at it while rain traced silver lines down the windows of my house outside Chicago. At 36, I had learned to distrust anything unexpected after midnight. My house had rules because rules made people predictable. Cameras covered the common rooms because memory could lie, loyalty could change, and people behaved differently when they believed nobody was watching. I opened the security feed. The kitchen appeared beneath pale blue night lighting, all marble counters, polished steel, and empty chairs. Then Claire stepped into frame. My cook, 27 years old, 3 weeks on my payroll. She was supposed to leave every night by 10. Yet there she stood in a gray sweatshirt and dark jeans, her light brown hair loosely tied behind her head, moving quietly through a room that should have been empty. I leaned closer to the monitor. "What are you doing here, Claire?" She could not hear me. That was the point. I had spent years watching people become versions of themselves they thought I wanted to see. Claire believed she was alone. Whatever happened next would be real. She crossed toward the breakfast nook and suddenly stopped. Someone was sitting at the table. My hand moved toward my phone before I recognized the white robe. My mother. Margaret sat beneath the small brass lamp with one hand wrapped around an empty glass. Claire approached slowly. "Mrs. Hale." My mother looked up. "Please do not call Vincent." I froze. Claire glanced toward the hallway. "Are you feeling sick?" "No." "Are you hungry?" Margaret hesitated. That hesitation told Claire what 4 expensive dinners and a private physician had failed to tell me. She pulled out a chair. "What sounds good?" "Nothing. Nothing is difficult to cook." My mother almost smiled. Claire opened the refrigerator, studied its shelves, then noticed the old wooden recipe box near the pantry. I had not touched it in 11 years. Neither had my mother. Claire lifted the lid carefully and moved through the faded index cards until Margaret whispered, "The yellow one." Claire found it. She read the handwriting, and my chest tightened before I even saw the ingredients. My father's handwriting. Potatoes, onion, celery, chicken broth, butter, winter soup. He used to make it whenever my mother could not eat. Claire set the card beside the stove and began cooking without another question. Soon my mother was talking, quietly at first, then laughing. I had forgotten what her laugh sounded like in that kitchen. Claire did not know the history inside that recipe box. She did not know I was watching. She certainly did not know that every simple movement was dismantling something I had spent years building inside myself. I hired Claire Bennett to cook my meals. Nothing more. But that night, as I watched her place a steaming bowl in front of my mother and sit beside her without asking for recognition, I realized I was no longer watching because I suspected her. I was watching because, for the first time in years, I had seen something I could not explain with money, fear, or obligation. And Claire was not finished. 3 weeks earlier, Claire Bennett had walked into my house carrying 2 canvas grocery bags and wearing the expression of someone who had taken a wrong turn into a museum. She did not stare at the marble staircase. She did not ask about the paintings. She barely noticed the 2 security men near the front entrance. Instead, she followed Ethan Cole into the kitchen, placed both bags on the island, opened my refrigerator, and frowned. I watched from the doorway. "Is there a problem?" She turned toward me. Her blue eyes moved over my dark suit, then returned to my face without hesitation. "Your refrigerator is organized by price instead of purpose." Ethan lowered his head, but I caught the beginning of a smile. I was not aware refrigerators had a philosophy. They do when somebody expects me to cook from them. Claire removed a jar from the top shelf and examined it. "You have imported mustard beside fresh berries. That tells me nobody who uses this kitchen actually cooks. Most people entering my home for the first time measured every word." Claire criticized my refrigerator within 4 minutes. I should have found it irritating. Instead, I became curious. "You know who I am?" I asked. She closed the refrigerator. "Vincent Hale. And what does that mean to you?" "At the moment, the man deciding whether I have a job." Her answer came without sarcasm. That made it more interesting. Ethan had already explained enough about me that Claire should have understood this was not an ordinary household. She simply refused to perform fear for my benefit. I stepped toward the island. "There are rules here. Every kitchen has rules. These are not kitchen rules." That finally earned her full attention. The third floor is private. You do not ask questions about visitors. Anything you hear inside this house stays inside this house. You arrive at noon. You leave by 10 at night. If Ethan tells you to leave earlier, you leave. You do not interfere with the security system. Claire glanced toward the small black camera above the pantry door. Does it watch the kitchen all day? Yes. Then whoever watches it is going to learn that your chef knives need sharpening. Ethan coughed into his hand. I looked at him. He immediately became serious. Claire began unpacking vegetables. Anything else? You are remarkably comfortable for someone being interviewed. I am standing in a kitchen. Kitchens make sense to me. And people? Her hands paused around a bunch of parsley. People make sense eventually. I studied her. You are not afraid of me. Claire looked up. Rain moved softly against the tall windows behind her. Should I be? There were answers to that question that had kept rooms silent for years. I gave her none of them. Most people are. Claire considered this, then placed the parsley beside the cutting board. Fear does not make food taste better, Mr. Hale. For the first time in longer than I cared to admit, I nearly laughed. When can you start? You have not tasted anything I have cooked. I have interviewed enough people to know competence when I see it. That sounds dangerously confident. Tomorrow. She thought for a second. Noon. Claire nodded as if she had just negotiated with an ordinary employer in an ordinary house. She gathered the empty grocery bags and headed toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back. I am still reorganizing that refrigerator. We will discuss it. No, we will not. Then she disappeared into the hallway. Ethan waited until she was gone before looking at me. You hired her because she insulted your refrigerator. I hired her because she did not care who I was. At the time, I thought that made Claire Bennett interesting. I did not yet understand that it would make her dangerous to every rule I had built my life around. By the end of Claire's first week, the refrigerator had been reorganized, my chef knives had been sharpened, and Ethan had developed the dangerous habit of smiling whenever she disagreed with me. By the end of her third week, Claire knew the rhythm of my house better than some people who had worked there for years. She arrived at noon. She checked deliveries herself. She prepared my mother's lunch before touching anything meant for me. At 10 minutes before 10 each night, she cleaned the counters, checked the stove, collected her coat, and left through the staff entrance. Predictable. I like predictable. She also learned which doors stayed closed. The third floor was private. The east hallway required separate access after 8. The pantry beside it held my mother's dietary supplies and medication organizer. Visitors came and went without explanation. Claire never asked who they were. She never touched the cameras either, although once, while chopping onions, she looked directly into the kitchen lens and said, "Whoever ordered these cutting boards should be ashamed." I was watching from my office. I almost answered. What I noticed most, however, was the way she treated my mother. Margaret had become quieter over the years. Some evenings, she talked through dinner. Others, she moved food around her plate and claimed she had eaten enough. Claire never argued with her. She adjusted. Smaller portions. Softer vegetables. Less salt. Different soups. When none of that worked, she simply sat nearby and listened. One afternoon, I stopped outside the kitchen when I heard my mother laughing. Claire was peeling apples while Margaret described a summer she had spent near Lake Michigan before I was born. Thomas used to cook when I was sick, my mother said. My father's name stopped me in the doorway. Claire continued peeling the apple. Was he good? He thought he was. Claire smiled. Those are usually the dangerous cooks. Margaret laughed again. There is an old recipe box somewhere. Vincent kept everything after his father died. That sounds sentimental. Do not tell him. Your secret is safe. I walked away before they saw me. For days later, Margaret barely touched dinner again. Then breakfast. Then lunch. Her physician adjusted the timing of her medication, but nothing seemed to help. Claire watched without making a production of her concern. On Friday evening, rain rolled across the property in heavy sheets. At 9:50, Claire put on her coat and headed outside. 5 minutes later, she returned, damp and annoyed. Her blue sedan would not start. Ethan checked the battery and told her roadside assistance was running nearly 3 hours behind because of the storm. You can wait in the staff sitting room, he said. Claire looked toward the windows. I can call a rideshare. Not in this weather. She reluctantly agreed. Ethan mentioned it to me before going upstairs. I barely registered the information. Claire was safe inside. The gates were secured. Nothing required my attention. By midnight, the house was silent. At 1:30, rain still tapped against my office windows while I worked through paperwork. At 2:13, my phone vibrated. Kitchen motion detected. I expected one of the night staff. Instead, Margaret appeared on the screen in her white robe. She moved slowly toward the breakfast nook and lowered herself into a chair. Seconds later, Claire entered the frame. She must have heard her from the staff room. Claire could have called Ethan. She could have called me. Instead, she approached my mother and lowered her voice. "Mrs. Hale, what do you need?" Margaret looked toward the old wooden recipe box, and Claire followed her eyes. Claire opened the old wooden recipe box as carefully as if it belonged to someone still living. My mother leaned forward beneath the brass lamp, her white robe gathered around her shoulders while rain whispered against the kitchen windows. "The yellow card," Margaret said. Claire moved through faded recipes until she found one stained at the corners. "Winter soup," she read softly. My chest tightened. I knew that handwriting. My father wrote every capital letter too large and every measurement too small. Claire studied the card. Potatoes, onion, celery, chicken broth, butter. Nothing complicated. Margaret smiled. Thomas believed complicated food was usually hiding something. I think I would have liked him. I looked away from the monitor for half a second. 11 years had passed since my father died, yet hearing a stranger say that felt strangely personal. When I looked back, Claire had tied on an apron and started cooking. She moved quietly, keeping the overhead lights off and using only the small lamp above the counter. Butter melted in a saucepan. Onion followed, then celery and potatoes. Margaret watched from the table. "You do not have to do this," she said. Claire stirred the pot. "I know. It is after 2 in the morning. Soup does not own a watch." My mother laughed. The sound stopped me cold. I could not remember the last time I had heard her laugh at that hour or in that room. Claire added broth and lowered the heat. She never checked her phone, never complained about being tired, never behaved like she expected anyone to thank her. That was the part one could not understand. In my experience, favors created debts. Gifts created obligations. Kindness usually arrived carrying an invisible invoice. Claire seemed to have forgotten hers. 20 minutes later, she placed a plain white bowl in front of Margaret. Steam curled between them. My mother took one spoonful and closed her eyes. Claire immediately leaned forward. "Too much salt." Margaret shook her head. "It tastes like home." Claire did not answer. She simply sat across from her. Spoon by spoon, my mother finished nearly the entire bowl. Then Margaret looked toward the dark hallway. "Vincent used to sit right there." Claire glanced at the empty chair beside her. "When he was little, he used to laugh all the time." Claire smiled. "I am having trouble imagining that. He had a terrible laugh. Now I definitely want to hear it." Against my better judgment, the corner of my mouth moved. Margaret lowered her voice. "After his father died, my son changed. He decided being needed was safer than being loved." I went still. Claire rested both hands around her coffee mug. Maybe nobody told him those are different things. Would he listen? Claire considered the question. Probably not to me. Why? Because I work for him. Margaret smiled sadly. Everyone works for Vincent in one way or another. Claire looked toward the window where rain traced the glass. Then maybe that is the problem. The words should have irritated me. Instead, they stayed with me. Claire washed the bowl, dried the counter, returned my father's recipe card to its box, and wrapped a blanket around Margaret's shoulders. She had no idea I had heard any of it. No idea that she had just walked through memories I kept locked tighter than any room upstairs. Then, as she turned toward the hallway, something beneath the brass lamp caught her attention. A white envelope. Ethan had left it there earlier for staff bonuses. Claire stopped. She looked toward the empty hallway, then down at the envelope. I leaned closer to the monitor as she picked it up. For 3 seconds, Claire held the envelope in both hands, and every lesson I had learned about people returned at once. Trust the evidence. Question generosity. Never confuse kindness with innocence. The envelope contained staff bonuses Ethan had prepared earlier that evening. Claire could not know the exact amount, but she knew there was cash inside. I watched her glance toward the hallway. Then she tucked the envelope beneath her arm and walked out of the kitchen. The warmth I had felt while watching her with my mother disappeared behind an instinct I knew too well. I switched camera feeds. Claire crossed the east hallway, past the staff sitting room, and pulled on her coat near the side entrance. Rain still covered the courtyard beyond the glass. I reached for my phone to call Ethan. Then Claire stepped outside. She did not head toward her disabled sedan. She turned toward the covered walkway beside the garage, where someone sat beneath a yellow security light. Tom Willis, 62 years old. Our gardener for 7 years. A small overnight bag rested beside his chair. Claire stopped. Tom, what are you still doing here? He stood, waiting for my son to pick me up. Claire looked at the bag. Your wife is having surgery tomorrow. Tom nodded. They moved it to 7 in the morning. His voice became quieter. Insurance covers most of it. Most is not all. Claire looked down at the envelope. My suspicion sharpened. She opened it. Tom immediately shook his head. Whatever you are thinking, do not. Claire found a smaller envelope inside with her name written across the front. Her bonus. She removed the cash and held it toward him. Take this. Absolutely not. Tom, you earned that. And I can earn more. He stepped back. You told me last week your car needs a new battery. Claire glanced toward her sedan, sitting uselessly in the rain. A battery can wait. So can the bill. You should not have to sit beside your wife tomorrow morning wondering which part of being there you can afford. Tom looked at the money, but did not take it. Why would you do this for me? Claire was silent for a moment. Rain struck the pavement beyond the roof in silver lines. Because tomorrow Mr. Hale will still be rich. You might not get tomorrow back with the person you love. The words landed somewhere I had not expected. Tom finally accepted the envelope. I will pay you back. No. Claire. Buy me coffee when she is home. Then we are even. She smiled, wished him good night, and walked back inside. I followed her across the cameras. She returned the larger envelope to the exact place Ethan had left it. Then she disappeared into the staff sitting room without looking back. No audience. No advantage. No request waiting behind the gesture. I remained at my desk staring at an empty hallway. For years, I had believed generosity was simply another form of leverage. Give enough and people owed you something. Claire had just given away money she genuinely needed to a man who could offer her nothing in return. At 7 the next morning, I called Ethan into my office. Pay Tom's remaining hospital expenses. Ethan paused. All of them. All of them. Anything else? I looked toward the security monitor. Double Claire's salary. Ethan stared at me for a second too long. She is going to hate that. Why? A faint smile appeared on his face. Because you still think money is the answer. He left before I could respond. I sat alone with that sentence until I realized the uncomfortable truth. Claire had done something I could not understand, so my first instinct was to purchase an explanation. Claire discovered the raise before noon, and Ethan was right. She hated it. At 11:47, my office door opened without a knock. Claire walked in holding a payroll notice in one hand and the expression of someone who had already decided I was wrong. Ethan sat across from my desk with a cup of coffee. He saw her face, stood immediately, and said, I suddenly remember somewhere else I need to be. Claire waited until the door closed behind him. Then she placed the paper on my desk. Did you double my salary? Good morning, Claire. Vincent. It was the first time she had used my first name. Somehow, that got my attention faster than anger would have. Yes. Change it back. I leaned into my chair. Most people do not complain about being paid more. Most people can make their own decisions. So can you. Apparently not about my paycheck. I looked at the notice. Your work is worth more than we originally agreed. Yesterday it was not. Silence settled between us. Claire glanced toward the security monitor beside my desk. Understanding reached her face slowly. You saw me with Tom. I did not lie. Yes. Her eyes hardened. You watched your mother too. Yes. She thought she had privacy. The cameras are there for security. Security and privacy are not the same thing. I folded my hands. You gave away money you needed. That was my choice. And I corrected the problem. No. You replaced my choice with yours. I stared at her. People argued with me about outcomes. Claire was arguing about principles. Tom's hospital expenses are paid, I said. She went still. You paid them? Yes. Why? Because I could. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. You really do think that is an answer? His wife gets the care she needs. He does not have to worry about the bill. What exactly is wrong with that? Nothing. If you did it because you wanted to help him. I did. Then leave me out of it. She pushed the payroll notice closer. I gave Tom my bonus because I wanted to. If you double my salary afterward, you turn what I did into something you purchased. Everything has a price, Claire. She looked directly at me. No. Everything has a cost. That is different. I said nothing. She continued, quieter now. You know the price of this house. You know what your cars cost. You probably know exactly what every person on your payroll earns. But value is different. Value is what something means when nobody owes you for it. The words irritated me because they made sense. You think money makes kindness less real? I think you use money when you do not know what else to do. That landed harder. Claire picked up the payroll notice. Change it back. Fine. Surprise crossed her face. That easy. Do not make me reconsider. A small smile appeared. She turned toward the door, then stopped. Paying Tom's bill was kind. You spent 10 minutes criticizing me for it. I criticized the reason you thought you needed. She looked toward the monitor. There is a difference. After she left, I sat alone for several minutes. Then I reached toward the security controls and disabled the kitchen camera. The screen went black. It was one camera in one room. A small thing. Yet my hand remained on the switch because, for the first time in years, choosing not to watch someone felt more difficult than watching them. And somehow more important. For 6 days after I turned off the kitchen camera, I left it off. That sounds insignificant until you understand that I had spent years believing information was the only reliable form of protection. If I could see a room, I could understand it. If I could understand it, I could control what happened. Inside it, Claire had somehow convinced me to leave one room unseen. She never knew. She continued arriving at noon, preparing Margaret's meals, arguing with Ethan about drinking too much coffee, and leaving before 10. My mother began eating normally again. Tom's wife came through surgery well. For several days, the house felt almost ordinary. Then Thursday night reminded me why I had built rules in the first place. At 9:17, an alert appeared on my office monitor. Restricted pantry access. The pantry sat off the east hallway and contained Margaret's dietary supplies, supplements, and weekly medication organizer. I opened the hallway feed. Daniel Cross stood outside the door. Daniel had managed household operations for 9 years. He coordinated staff schedules, vendors, maintenance, and access credentials. He was supposed to be checking inventory near the garage. Instead, he unlocked the pantry and stepped inside. I called Ethan. Where is Daniel supposed to be? Garage inventory. He is in the east pantry. Silence. I am coming. No. Check his schedule first. I watched the screen. Daniel emerged less than a minute later carrying a small white prescription bottle. He looked down the hallway, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and walked away. My attention sharpened. Then Claire entered the camera frame carrying a tray with tea and sliced apples. She stopped. Daniel had left the pantry door slightly open. Claire looked toward the hallway, set the tray down, and stepped inside. 30 seconds later, she came back holding 2 prescription bottles. She turned them beneath the wall light, comparing the labels. Daniel reappeared at the far end of the hall. Claire looked up. Neither moved for a moment. The hallway microphone caught her voice. These have the same label. Daniel approached calmly. Then there is no problem. Claire looked through the clear plastic. The tablets are different. Mrs. Hale's physician changed the prescription. That is not your concern. Claire's expression changed. She has barely been eating all week. She said she feels worse after dinner. Daniel extended his hand. Give me the bottles. Claire did not. Why was one? Hidden behind cleaning supplies. My phone vibrated. Ethan. Vincent. I reached Margaret's physician. He did not change anything. Every thought in my head became quiet. Get my mother upstairs and have the doctor come here. Already happening. And Ethan? Yes. Bring Claire to my office. 10 minutes later, Claire stood across from my desk with the 2 bottles between us. Something is wrong, she said. I know. Ethan entered behind her, holding his tablet. His expression told me the situation had become worse. I checked the pantry access records. Claire turned. Ethan placed the tablet on my desk. 3 entries appeared beneath the same staff credential. Tuesday, Wednesday, tonight. The name beside all 3 was Claire Bennett. She stared at the screen. I have never opened that pantry before tonight. I looked at her, and every old instinct returned at once. Trust records. Trust systems. Trust what can be proven. Claire saw the hesitation before I could hide it. Her voice became quieter. You think I did this? I think I need facts. Pain crossed her face, brief but unmistakable. Then she nodded. Fine. Get them. She turned toward the door. I wanted to stop her. I wanted to say that 6 days ago I had switched off a camera because she taught me trust required space. But when trust finally demanded something from me, I had reached for evidence first. Ethan looked at the access log again. Vincent, what? He enlarged the timestamps. There is one problem. I looked down. What problem? Ethan raised his eyes toward Claire. At one of these exact times, I was standing beside her on the other side of the house. Ethan pulled up the first timestamp. Tuesday at 8:42 in the evening. The access log showed Claire entering the restricted pantry. The west hallway camera showed her at the same moment carrying grocery bags beside Ethan. Wednesday was worse for whoever had created the records. At 9:06, Claire's credential opened the pantry, while Claire herself sat with Margaret in the breakfast nook, reading ingredient labels from a cookbook. Someone duplicated her credential, Ethan said. I looked toward Claire. She had stopped near the office door, but had not left. Who can do that? I asked. Ethan's expression hardened. 3 people. You, me, Daniel. Claire folded her arms. I am guessing neither of you needed to frame the cook. I deserved the edge in her voice. Ethan searched the administrative records. Daniel had created a temporary replacement credential 3 weeks earlier, supposedly because Claire's original access card had failed during her second day. He never deleted the duplicate. Instead, he assigned its activity to her staff profile. Clean. Simple. Designed to make the system tell exactly the story I would believe. Find Daniel, I said. Already secured in the guest office, Ethan replied. He is not going anywhere until we understand this. We did not need threats. We needed records. Within an hour, Ethan found them. Daniel had been communicating with a financial advisor connected to a family trust my mother controlled. Margaret was scheduled to review that trust the following month. If her health appeared unstable, the review could be delayed, preserving an arrangement that financially benefited a company connected to Daniel. He had not needed a dramatic crisis. He only needed Margaret tired, confused, and unwell long enough for other people to question whether she should make financial decisions. I felt something colder than anger. Disappointment. 9 years. 9 years of access, routine, and assumed loyalty. Claire had understood the truth in less than a minute because she noticed what went into my mother's meals. Margaret's physician confirmed she was safe and that the irregular medication had been identified early. By midnight, Daniel's access to the property, staff systems, and financial records had been permanently removed. Claire was in the kitchen when I found her. She was rolling her chef knives into a closed canvas case. You were right, I said. I know. Daniel duplicated your credential. I know that too. Ethan told me. She folded the canvas carefully. Then why are you packing? Claire looked at me. Because when the system said my name, you trusted the system before you trusted me. For 5 minutes. Trust does not become harmless because doubt was brief. I stepped closer, then stopped several feet away. Stay until this is settled. That sounds like an order. It is safer here. That is not what I asked. I heard my mother's voice in my head. He controls. I wanted to arrange a car, change Claire's schedule, assign security, decide every detail before she could object. Instead, I forced myself to ask a question I should have learned years ago. What do you want? Claire became still. I want to stay with Margaret until her doctor says she is fine. Then I want to go home. Every instinct told me to argue. I did not. All right. Her expression softened slightly. Several hours later, Margaret was resting comfortably. Claire put on her coat near the front entrance. A car can take you home, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Is that another order? An offer? After a moment, she nodded. Then yes. I opened the front door. Claire stepped outside, then turned back. You did something different tonight. What? You asked. She walked toward the waiting car. I watched the gates open and let her leave without conditions. Power could force someone to remain inside my world. I was beginning to understand that trust meant giving them the freedom to walk away. Claire did not return the next day. She did not return the day after that either. On the third morning, Margaret asked whether I had called her. No. My mother looked at me over her coffee. Why not? She wanted space. Margaret smiled faintly. Look at you learning. I ignored that. By the 5th day, the house had returned to the quiet efficiency I once preferred. Meals arrived from a private catering service. The kitchen remained spotless. Nobody criticized my refrigerator. Nobody told Ethan he drank too much coffee. Nobody argued with me about the difference between price and value. Everything worked perfectly. I hated it. That evening, rain returned to Chicago, soft against the windows instead of heavy like the storm 5 nights earlier. I stayed in my office long after midnight, reading the same page of a report without absorbing a word. At 2:13 in the morning, My phone vibrated. Kitchen motion detected. I stared at the notification. The kitchen camera had been restored when Ethan reset the security system during the investigation. I had never turned it off again. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I opened the feed. Claire stood in the kitchen. For several seconds, I simply stared. Her light brown hair was damp from the rain. A dark blue coat hung open over her sweater. 2 canvas grocery bags rested on the marble island. She began unpacking potatoes, celery, onions, chicken broth, butter, and a loaf of bread. The same ingredients from that first night. Then she reached for my father's recipe box. I was already standing when Claire suddenly looked directly into the camera. "Are you coming down, or are you going to watch me all night?" I stopped. Then something escaped me before I could control it. A laugh. A real one. My mother had been right. It was terrible. I went downstairs. Claire was slicing celery when I entered. "How did you get through the gate?" "Margaret added me to the guest list." "Of course she did." Claire smiled. "She also called me and complained that your catering service thinks black pepper is a personality." I almost laughed again. "You quit." "I did." "Then why are you here?" She placed the knife safely on the cutting board and faced me. "Because your mother asked me to come. And because leaving a job is not the same as leaving people." I looked at her for a long moment. "Are you coming back?" "Not as your employee." The answer hurt less than I expected. Maybe because she was standing there. "Then what are you?" Claire considered it. "Someone who is allowed to say no to you." "That sounds inconvenient." "For you, probably." She turned back to the soup. I stepped beside the island. "What do you need?" Claire handed me a potato peeler. "Start there." I looked at it. "You cannot be serious." "You asked." So I peeled potatoes. Badly. Claire corrected me twice and eventually took one away before I reduced it to half its original size. For nearly an hour, nothing in the room required authority. No one waited for my permission. No one cared about my reputation. We simply cooked. When the soup was ready, Claire glanced toward the black camera above the pantry. "You turn that back on." "Ethan." "Restored the system. Do you need it?" I looked at the lens. For years, cameras had given me certainty. They showed who entered, who left, who touched what, who lied about where they had been. But they had never taught me why Claire sat beside my mother at 2 in the morning. They had never explained why she gave away money she needed. They had only shown me enough to realize how little I understood. I took out my phone and disabled the kitchen feed. The indicator light disappeared. Claire looked at me. "That is new. I am learning." Slowly. "Do not ruin the moment." She smiled and handed me a bowl. Outside, rain moved quietly across the dark windows. Inside, the house no longer felt like something I had to protect from everyone who entered it. I had installed cameras because I trusted no one. Claire never asked me to trust her. She simply gave me something worth trusting, then waited until I was ready to see it.